Open it up. You didn't want that for Christmas?
You stinking parents!
Hey, buddy, watch this.
All right, folks, let's talk about some disappointing cards from Descent of Dragons. Fair warning, Priest Galakron isn't actually on the list, but it was just too good of a meme for the intro. But I do have a lot of cards that are like pretty disappointing that didn't make the list, and I'm gonna flash on screen right now. There's so many cards. Okay, but now we're gonna jump into the actual 5 worst, the most disappointing cards of all. These are cards that people rated really high before the expansion, and in reality, as we see their play rates, the play rates are super low, and there are some dramatic differences in this video. Starting off here with Dragon Ma Poacher, 4 mana, 8/8 rush. And this is a card that early in the set saw a ton of play. I think it peaked at around 12.5% of decks, but right now has pretty much totally fallen out of the meta. It turns out there's just a big consistency issue with Dragon Ma Poacher. Like, yes, the upside's insane, but there's just not quite enough dragons to make it consistent. So sometimes you hit turn 4, and there's nothing really to do. And sometimes you're on turn 8, and it's like, yeah, I still can't really use my Dragon Ma Poacher. You want to be doing other things. It's just hard to slot into a turn because there's like a lot of dragons, but not like everywhere are there dragons. Now, if for instance Dragon Ma Poacher had like Rush by default instead of having to gain Rush, I think this card would still be very widely played because it'd have a really solid baseline effect. Even if there wasn't a dragon, you're like not super unhappy to play a 4/4 with Rush. But when it doesn't have Rush, a 4 mana 4/4 is like, oh god, this one doesn't feel all that good. So that conditionality is more punishing, and that means Dragon Ma Poacher just isn't quite good enough or consistent enough to make the cut in deck lists right now, and that's why it's fallen out. And frankly, I don't really see that changing because, you know, we're never going to have a bigger dragon influence than we have right now, or at least it's super unlikely to get like another dragon-heavy set. So if it doesn't make the cut today, how is it ever really gonna make sense? And there's a lot of Highlander decks out there too that could run this sort of card. So it feels like Dragon Ma Poacher, you know, for the first few days, yes, but after that, just doesn't make sense, thereby making it one of the most disappointing cards in the set. So next up here, let's talk about Murozond, my I told you so of this expansion, although I really can't be too prideful because I got a lot of things wrong myself. But Murozond was ranked really highly by the community, 4.6 average rating, putting it just outside the top 25 of all cards for the expansion, but in reality being played outside the top half of cards. And really, even then, it feels like Murozond isn't actually all that good in the decks that are playing him. Just kind of a thing people feel like they have to run. And that's because it turns out Murozond suffers from the exact problem I thought he would, which is that replicating your opponent's plays is usually not what you want to be doing. You want to be doing kind of the opposite of what your opponent is doing. So when they play a ton of big stuff, like, yeah, you can play a ton of big stuff off Murozond, but then you get hit in the face by a ton of big stuff. You want to play like a removal spell whenever they play lots of big stuff. So having those turns where Murozond lines up perfectly is pretty rare. And I've had some fun with Murozond off like random generation effects, and he's been great. But when you run him in your deck and he's sitting in hand forever and you're waiting for that perfect moment, that's a big opportunity cost where he could be something more impactful, more direct, more efficient, more consistent. So Murozond, it turns out, ends up being a little bit more awkward than powerful, and those moments where he's perfect are so few and far between that this card just doesn't make a lot of sense right now. All right, next up here we have Candle Breath for Rogue, a card which people saw as this like ultimate super efficient card draw card. How could you go wrong with this one? Well, it turns out context really does matter, and there's really no reason to run dragons in Rogue, and there weren't enough dragons to support Rogue. Really only Waxadread, which itself is a pretty disappointing card as well by the numbers. So yeah, there's just no dragons really showing up in Rogue, so there's no way you can support Candle Breath. Yeah, if it works, it's amazing, but it just doesn't work. And I think that's an important reminder to consider every card review season. There has to be a home, an archetype, a context, a deck for these things to live in. Candle Breath doesn't have that, so of course it's gonna fall short, despite if it works being amazing. It just doesn't work, and I don't think that's gonna change either, because we're probably never gonna get a ton of dragons all of a sudden in Rogue. So Candle Breath is probably always gonna be that card that could have been instead of the card that was. So now let's move on to Platebreaker, another big neutral tech card, kind of like our Dragon Ma Poacher here, but this time targeting armor instead of dragons. And this is one that everybody just went nuts over when it was first revealed. Oh my god, universal armor removal is absolutely crazy. There's been so much Control Warrior in the past with tons of armor. This card's going to be bonkers. Druids have gotten lots of armor too. This card's going to be nuts. And so far, that certainly has not panned out to be true. It's not really being played any at all because there's not a big armor deck in the meta. And this is an important reminder, just because a card's on this list right now doesn't mean a card will always be disappointing. There might come a meta where there's a combo deck, an OTK deck that really cares about a specific number of life, and if there's an armor class competing against them, then Platebreaker could absolutely make the cut. Think about, for instance, with like Holy Wrath Paladin right now, if there was a big warrior deck that were playing for tons of armor, Holy Wrath Paladin would probably run Platebreaker in order to tech against that sort of deck. But at the moment, no big defensive armor deck exists, so Platebreaker has no reason to exist outside of maybe Wild to prevent shenanigans with like the 2500 armor druid that's out there in Wild format. So what that means is it just doesn't line up right now. Will it ever line up? I think there's a chance it could. Yeah, that meta could exist somewhere in the future, so don't totally give up on your Platebreaker for now. But at the moment, it just doesn't make any sense, and it's far too specific and niche in its design to get there, which, again, good thing to learn about tech cards. Sometimes they need that context to work as well, and for Platebreaker, just isn't there yet. And then finally here we have, I guess I'm kind of cheating. There's 4 cards here in the final spot. They're the Shaman boys, as I like to call them. And these 4 cards took 4 of the bottom 5 spots in my system here. Only Platebreaker also made it into the bottom 5. So Cumulo was the worst, followed by Lightning, Squall, and Surging. So I didn't want to just make the whole list Shaman cards. That'd be pretty boring. So I decided to bundle them together, get those other cards into the list as well. And I'll tell you the story of what happened here. It's basically that Shaman was super OP during the reveal season with Evolved Shaman. All these cards in one way or another kind of made sense. And people just thought, oh man, Shaman's so good. These are just going to be good. They fit into the game plan really nicely. There's overload stuff. There's wideboard stuff. You know, there's things going on here. There's quest stuff for Cumulo, like a Pyroblast for the 5 mana. Oh my god. Right? All these things happened. People rated these cards really highly, but it turns out Shaman was going to be OP, just in a Galakron direction, not in these other directions. So all of these fell to the wayside because they didn't really support Galakron decks, and Galakron being the big boy means the Shaman boys here just didn't get there. And again, I will say, I think all of these cards make a lot of sense in different ways, and I have certainly not given up hope on any of these cards. They could very well be important building pieces for Shaman in the future, particularly as we move into a rotation where some cards rotate out and we need more good stuff to empower Shaman. A lot of these make sense in that way for me. So not going to be bad forever, probably. Just right now, they fell to the wayside because Shaman was doing so many better things elsewhere, and these cards just didn't line up. So don't feel bad if you got these wrong. A lot of people did. Doesn't mean anything. They're probably still going to be good cards in the long run. So unless you're using Trump's system where it's very specific to the next meta, your general assessments will probably still be fairly accurate in the future, because I think each of these has a chance. Maybe not the Dragon synergy stuff in particular, because who knows if Dragon Shaman will ever get any better, but certainly Cumulo in particular, I think it's still going to line up somewhere along the way. That said, that wraps it up for our disappointing cards here in Descent of Dragons. Final reminder, I'm not saying these cards are bad. Just saying, right now, they haven't quite gotten there yet. Everybody needs a little time to grow, to find themselves, and that might be the case with a handful of the cards in this video. That said, if you got these right, if you got these wrong, share those thoughts in the comments below. I'm really excited to see how accurate or inaccurate you guys were, and don't be sad if you got them wrong. Who cares? The goal is not to be right. The goal is to learn a little bit more about Hearthstone, how to play card assessments, how to build decks, and these kinds of videos always help us do that, I think. We learn a little more every single time we look back at assessments of old. That said, thanks much, as always, for watching, and until next time, game on.
Dragons take flight above the